Helping the dog was the most natural thing Celia Wakefield had ever done. It was also, according to the men who would surround her cabin before sunrise, a federal crime. Celia was 29 years old, a wildlife veterinary technician at the Clearwater Rehabilitation Center outside Orofino, Idaho, and the only person for 11 miles in any direction who would know what a Belgian Malinois looked like beneath 60 pounds of ice-matted fur and a bleeding tactical harness. She had spent the last 12 hours stabilizing a wolf cub with a fractured pelvis and 2 barn owls with lead poisoning, and what she wanted more than anything was to get home before the February storm buried Highway 12 entirely. Her headlights cut through the snow curtain at 1:47 in the morning. The road was a tunnel of white, the pines on either side bowed low under new accumulation. She had the heat cranked full and her knuckles ached on the wheel of her old Chevy Silverado. She almost missed it, a dark shape at the edge of the tree line. She thought deer. She eased off the gas. Not a deer. The animal was collapsed on the road shoulder, half swallowed by a drift. Celia pulled over and grabbed her flashlight before the truck had fully stopped. When the beam landed on the animal, she went very still. Belgian pounds at least, with a short fawn and black coat now dark with blood and ice. He wore a heavy tactical harness, matte black, with angular ballistic plating on the chest and flanks, no unit patch, no flag, only a stamped serial designation on the chest plate, K9VX3. The dog lifted his head when the light hit him. His eyes were amber, fever-bright, and for a moment the two of them looked at each other on that empty highway with the snow falling between them. He didn't growl, he didn't try to rise. He simply watched her with an expression that Celia, in 11 years of working with animals, had never seen on a dog before. It wasn't fear, it was exhaustion mixed with a question he had no way to ask. "Hey," she said softly, crouching in the snow, "I see you." The wound was in his right hind quarter. A through and through, she could determine even through the harness. High-velocity entry. The bleeding had slowed in the cold, which was the only thing keeping him alive. She got him into the back of the Silverado, using every ounce of strength she had. He didn't fight her. He let her lift him, let her lay him on the emergency blanket behind the seat, let her press gauze against the wound without a sound. She drove the remaining 7 miles to her property with one hand on the wheel and one hand reaching back to maintain pressure, talking to him the entire time. Her cabin sat at the end of a half-mile gravel drive off the highway, flanked on 3 sides by national forest. Her father had built it. Her 8-year-old brother, Eli, was asleep inside. He stayed with her on weekends while their mother worked double shifts in Lewiston, under the watch of their neighbor's college-age daughter, who had fallen asleep on the couch. Celia bypassed the cabin entirely and drove straight to the detached equipment shed where she kept her rehabilitation supplies. Under the fluorescent lights, with the storm howling outside and her breath fogging in the cold air, she worked. She unstrapped the tactical harness carefully, peeling the Velcro with the same deliberate hands she used on raptors and wolves. The harness was heavy, heavier than it should have been, even accounting for the ballistic plating. She set it on the workbench and didn't look at it yet. The dog first. He was a magnificent animal beneath the blood and ice. He watched her clean and irrigate the wound with the steadiness that made her chest ache. When she administered the local block before suturing, he flinched once, then lay his chin flat on the blanket and simply breathed. "You've been stitched up before," she murmured. "You know how this goes." As she worked the final sutures, she noticed something on the collar beneath the harness. A small device, black, roughly the size of a matchbook, with a blinking amber light. It had the unmistakable look of a military-grade GPS transponder. Celia stared at it for a long moment. Then she picked up a pair of heavy shears, wrapped the device in a shop rag, and crushed it under the heel of her boot until the blinking stopped. She didn't know precisely why she did it, only that the dog was shot, and someone had shot him. And if that someone was searching for him through that amber light, she intended to buy time before they arrived here. She called him Vega. It seemed to suit him, steady, fixed, bright. He spent the rest of the night in the equipment shed on a nest of insulated blankets, with water and the remains of a grilled chicken she'd been saving for herself. He ate slowly and methodically, watching the shed door the entire time. Celia slept in a camp chair, with her 357 revolver in her lap. By the time grey light filtered through the shed's high windows, the storm had dropped to a windless, sullen snowfall. Celia woke with a crick in her neck and the immediate stomach-dropping realization that something had changed. Vega was not on his blankets. He was at the shed door, standing, ears swiveled hard forward. The sutures were holding, no fresh blood, but his whole body was rigid, hackles raised in a line from his shoulders to the base of his tail. "Vega," she said. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the door. Celia rose and moved to the small side window. She wiped condensation with her sleeve and looked out at her property. The snow had smoothed everything flat and white. Her truck, the woodpile, the bird feeders she'd put up for Eli. No birds. In winter she always had juncos and chickadees. The feeders were empty of movement. The trees were empty of sound. There was a quality to the stillness that had nothing to do with weather. She checked her phone. No signal. She always kept 2 bars, even in the worst blizzards. She went inside to check the landline. Dead. Celia stood in the kitchen with the handset in her palm, not moving, while the information assembled itself in her mind, the way a fracture pattern assembles itself on an X-ray. Not cut by storm damage. Jammed. Severed. Someone was already on her property. Eli was upstairs. She took the stairs quietly. 2 at a time eased open his door. He was still asleep, one arm thrown over a stuffed bison he'd had since he was 4. She looked at him for 2 breaths, then went back downstairs, pulled on her coat and boots, and went to the equipment shed. She had been avoiding the harness. Now she examined it properly. The ballistic plating was sophisticated. Layers of ceramic and polymer she didn't recognize from any civilian manufacturer. The stitching was military specification throughout, and sewn into the inner chest panel, accessible only if you knew to press along the lower seam, was a hard, flat shape the size of a credit card. She pressed along the seam. A concealed pocket, Velcro-sealed, opened cleanly. Inside, a micro SD card in a waterproof pouch and a small laminated card printed with a seal she didn't recognize and the words, "Classified, NCIS Case File 7742 Bravo. Evidence of recro, do not destroy." Celia's hands went still. She put the card back in the pouch. She tucked the pouch into her inner coat pocket, against her sternum. Vega made a sound she had never heard from a dog. A single, very low, very controlled vocalization. Not a bark, not a growl. A warning calibrated to carry only as far as she was standing. She looked out the side window. There, at the tree line, 40 yards out, a figure in white winter camouflage, standing motionless between 2 lodgepole pines. The rifle in the figure's hands was suppressed, and the optics were too large and too expensive for any hunter she had ever seen in these woods. She counted 3 figures before she stopped counting. They were moving in a slow contracting arc around the property, toward the cabin, toward the place where Eli was sleeping. Everything in Celia Wakefield went quiet in the way things go quiet, right before a person does something they never imagined they were capable of. She had grown up on this land. She knew every foot of it, every drainage channel, every deer trail, every place where the terrain could make a person invisible or expose them completely. The men outside knew none of that. "Come on," she breathed, and Vega rose without hesitation. There was a second exit from the equipment shed, a sliding panel on the north side that opened onto a narrow terrain depression where snowmelt had carved a channel through the frozen ground over decades. In summer, it ran with water. In February, it was a 4-foot trench of ice and earth, wide enough for one person and one dog, invisible from the cabin or the tree line, unless you were standing directly above it. They moved through it on their stomachs. The cold was extraordinary, seeping through every layer into her joints. She focused on the cabin's back door, 60 yards, 50, 40, and on Vega moving just ahead of her, his belly close to the ground, his injured leg compensating with the efficiency of a dog trained not to stop. 30 yards out, Vega froze. She froze with him. A figure had come around the far corner of the cabin, moving in a tight perimeter sweep, rifle up, 25 yards, closing. Celia pressed herself flat into the snow. The revolver was in her hand. She had 4 rounds and no count of how many men were on her property. The figure stopped and raised a radio. In the perfect stillness of that frozen morning, the words carried clearly, "Bravo team, hold position. If the package isn't in the secondary structure, we go loud." Go loud. Vega moved before she could decide anything, not in panic, in decision. He cleared the trench in one smooth surge, closed 25 yards in 3 seconds, and took the figure down with 80 pounds of velocity and absolute purpose. The rifle went sideways into the snow. The figure hit the ground, and by the time Celia was on her feet and across the distance, Vega had the forearm locked and the figure was not moving. On the figure's belt, a radio, she unclipped it. A voice came through immediately, calm and cold. "If you find the harness without the drive, burn the structure, leave nothing recoverable. Burn the structure, the cabin, where Eli was." Celia ran. She hit the back door at full sprint, Vega behind her. Inside, she killed every light, took the stairs in 4 steps, and lifted Eli out of bed before he was fully awake. "Celia," he was soft with sleep, blinking at her. "We're playing a hiding game," she said. "Remember the root cellar? That's where we're going right now. Right now, baby." "Is it still night?" "Almost morning. Bring your bison." She got him to the root cellar beneath the kitchen floor, reinforced pine walls, a storm lantern, the emergency kit from 2 winters ago. She handed him the lantern and looked him in the eyes with complete honesty, the way she always had. "Do not come out until you hear me say your whole name. Not Eli James Wakefield, you understand?" He looked at her with the particular seriousness of a child who knows this is not a game and has decided to be brave anyway. "Okay." She locked the hatch and went back to the hallway. She pressed her back to the wall beside the kitchen entrance with the revolver in both hands. Vega settled against her leg, his ears rotating slowly like dishes, searching a signal. "I have an NCIS evidence drive," Celia called out, her voice steadier than she had any right to expect. "And I have your team's radio. I've been broadcasting your traffic for the last 20 minutes. She had not been broadcasting anything. She had no idea how to do that. But she said it the way a person has said something they know to be true. Silence. Then the front door opened, not kicked, not breached, opened with a key, which meant they had come prepared and planned and had resources she could not match. A man stepped into the hallway. He was in his 50s, grey at the temples, wearing winter field gear without insignia. He moved with the unhurried authority of someone who had never found himself in a situation he could not resolve. He looked at her and the revolver and Vega and said, with complete calm, "Mrs. Celia Wakefield, my name is Director Harlan Moss. You have something that belongs to a classified federal operation." "I'm a vet tech," Celia said, "not a federal anything." "You have a micro SD card that contains information constituting a matter of national security. Give it to me, and your brother stays where he is, warm and asleep." Her brother he knew about Eli. Vega's growl was so low she felt it in her sternum before she heard it with her ears. "The dog knows you," Celia said. Something crossed Moss's face, not fear, but the recognition of a complication he had not fully priced into the operation. The K9 was compromised. His handler was compromised. The asset needed to be recovered before it fell into the wrong hands. "His handler," she said. "You mean the person who was with him when he was shot?" Moss said nothing. "The dog would have stayed with a handler who fell," Celia said. "You don't leave the body of someone you've worked with for years." He ran because the threat was still active. He ran because whoever shot at them was still there. "Give me the drive, Ms. Wakefield." 2 more figures appeared in the hallway behind Moss, both watching the revolver and the dog with the careful attention of men who have done the arithmetic and find it acceptable. Celia understood her position. 1 woman, 4 rounds, her own hallway. The math did not favor her. She also understood that the card pressed against her sternum was the only reason these men had not already done what they'd come to do. It was the only leverage she had, and she intended to spend it as slowly as possible. "Tell me the handler's name," she said. For the first time, Moss looked uncertain, not afraid but recalculating, as if the question had arrived from an angle he hadn't mapped. The window to the left of the front door shattered inward. Not from impact, from the shockwave of rotor blades, a percussion she had not consciously registered because every part of her mind had been in that hallway. Now it hit her all at once. Heavy rotors, multiple aircraft, the searchlights cutting through every window simultaneously and flooding the cabin with white. Over the radio on her hip, a voice she had never heard said clearly, "All units, this is Naval Criminal Investigative Service. You are surrounded. Drop weapons and move to the exterior with hands visible. This is your only notification." Moss turned, his men turned. The calculation behind their eyes came up empty. Vega sat down beside Celia and looked up at her. "Good boy," she said, and her voice broke on it slightly. In the hours that followed, Celia sat on the tailgate of a government vehicle with a shock blanket around her shoulders and watched. Harlan Moss and 4 members of his private intelligence cell walked out in restraints into the gray Idaho morning. Special Agent Rina Takahashi, lead NCIS investigator, sat beside her and explained what she was able to explain. The handler's name had been Sergeant Dylan Archer. He had partnered with Vega for 3 years. 6 days before the night on Highway 12, Archer had intercepted evidence of an illegal transfer of classified DoD logistical data to a foreign buyer, evidence that implicated Moss and 2 mid-level defense contractors by name. Archer had downloaded the evidence to the drive, secured it in Vega's harness, and transmitted a fragmentary location ping before Moss's team found him. Archer had not survived, Vega had. "How did you find us?" Celia asked. Takahashi nodded toward the tree line, where a tech was retrieving a small surveillance drone from the branches of a lodgepole pine. "Archer's last ping gave us a search radius. We had a drone up within 4 hours. When Moss's team moved in and went dark, we lost one of their operators about 30 minutes before we arrived." She paused. "We accelerated." The operative Vega had taken down in the snow. He was alive, in custody, and cooperating. Celia reached into her coat and took out the waterproof pouch. She set it in Takahashi's hands. Takahashi received it with both hands and a stillness that conveyed exactly what the thing had cost to preserve. "What happens to Vega?" Celia asked. Takahashi looked across the yard to where Vega sat under a handler's supervision, composed and watchful, his eyes tracking Eli, who had been brought up from the root cellar and was currently eating a granola bar and interrogating an NCIS technician about the drone with complete composure. A K-9 separated from service after losing a handler in the field qualifies for civilian placement. Takahashi said he'd need a home with someone experienced in high-drive working dogs, rural property, calm environment. She looked at Celia without quite looking at her. Someone with medical experience handling animals under stress. Across the snow-covered yard, Eli turned and held out a piece of granola bar toward the dog. With the absolute uncomplicated confidence of an 8-year-old who has already decided an animal is good, Vega stretched his nose forward, and took it with extraordinary gentleness. "I think I can manage that," Celia said. 3 weeks later, when the snow had finally begun pulling back from the south-facing slope behind the equipment shed and water ran again in the drainage channel, Eli decided the dog needed a permanent name. Not Vega, that had been Celia's provisional name, a placeholder for the space between emergency and permanence. Eli thought about it for several days, with the gravity he brought to all important decisions. He considered and rejected several options. Then one morning at breakfast he looked up and said simply, "Archer." He didn't know where it came from, he just said it felt right. Celia didn't explain. She clipped the new tag to the collar, crouched in the cold mud of the yard with a Belgian Malinois leaning the full weight of himself against her ribs, and thought about a sergeant she had never met who had trusted a dog with the most important thing he owned. And about the dog who had carried it 11 miles through a February snowstorm on a bullet wound and found, on a dark highway, the one person who would stop. Some things find exactly who they were meant to find.